Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift back in time. We're leaving the noise and the bright screens of our world behind and stepping into a place lit by the sun, the moon, and the soft flicker of candles. Imagine yourself in a bustling Scandinavian port city, sometime in the early 18th century. The air is crisp and tastes of salt. You can feel a gentle, persistent wind coming off the gray water of the harbor, a wind that carries the scent of pine tar and distant lands. The buildings in front of you are tall and narrow, leaning against each other for support like old friends after a long night at the tavern. And their faces are dotted with windows, dozens of them, glinting in the low, golden afternoon sun. This is a world built to catch the light. You probably want to survive this journey if you were actually there. The water alone would be a gamble, but from the comfort of your bed, you're perfectly safe. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see where we all are in the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet finally feel steady on the cobblestones after weeks at sea. The gentle rolling sway of the ship still lives in your bones, a phantom motion that makes the solid ground feel strangely unreliable. You take a deep breath, trying to sort through the city's complex perfume. It's a mix of the sharp, clean scent of the sea, the pungent odor of fish being unloaded in barrels down the quay, the earthy smell of damp wood from the hulls of ships, and a faint, ever-present hint of coal smoke hanging in the air. This is the scent of commerce, of a city alive and breathing. Gulls cry overhead, their calls almost blending with the shouts of sailors in Danish or Swedish, a rhythmic, guttural language you don't understand but can interpret through its sheer energy. You start to walk, your boots clattering on the uneven stones. The city isn't quiet. It's a symphony of wood and iron. The rumble of heavy wooden cartwheels, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer from a nearby lane, the creak of a tavern sign swinging in the breeze. Your eyes are drawn upwards to the architecture that defines this place. The buildings are a riot of color, deep ochre, faded brick red, and occasionally the striking green of a copper roof that has long since surrendered to the elements. They are mostly timber-framed, their wooden bones exposed and painted in dark, contrasting colors. And they all seem to reach for the sky, their gables sharply pitched. Historians still argue whether the distinctive steep-gabled roofs were purely for shedding the heavy winter snow, or also a proud display of a builder's carpentry skill and wealth. Looking at them now, it feels like both. They are practical, certainly, but they are also beautiful, a jagged man-made mountain range against the pale northern sky. But more than the colors or the shapes, it's the windows that hold your attention. They are everywhere, rows of them, columns of them, marching across the facades of merchant houses and guild halls. They are not large single panes of glass like we know today. Instead, they are made up of dozens of smaller diamond-shaped or rectangular panes, held together by delicate strips of lead. This is because large, flat sheets of glass are a luxury beyond imagining. Each small pane is a precious thing, slightly warped and bubbly, so the view through it is never quite perfect. The world outside is softened, its edges blurred, as if you're looking at a watercolor painting. This imperfect glass catches the light in 1,000 different ways, scattering it and making the entire building front shimmer. It gives the city a jeweled quality, especially now, as the sun begins its slow descent. You notice how life is oriented around these openings. In a second-story window, a woman sits with her needlework, her head bent to catch the last of the usable daylight. Below, in the ground floor of a workshop, a craftsman has his bench pushed right up against the glass, his tools laid out in the pool of light. These windows are not just architectural features, they are essential tools for living. In a place where winter nights are profoundly long and the sun in those months is a shy, fleeting visitor, every single photon is precious. The very design of these homes is a testament to a deep, instinctual understanding of this fact. Rooms are arranged to face south, to drink in the warmth and light. Walls are painted in pale colors to reflect and amplify it. This is a city that loves the sun, that craves it. It's a relationship built on scarcity. You don't take daylight for granted when it abandons you for half the year. It's a form of wealth. a currency of well-being, but one that for now is freely given by the sky. No one here could possibly imagine that a king, in his infinite wisdom, would soon decide to tax the very sunshine that spills through these panes of glass. For now the light is free, and you can feel the entire city basking in its glow, unaware of the coming shadow. You turn away from the grand sweep of the harbor, drawn into a narrower street that winds away from the water like a tributary. The sounds of the port fade behind you, replaced by a more intimate urban chorus. Here, the buildings press closer together, their upper stories jutting out over the lane almost close enough to touch. This architectural feature, the jetty, was a clever way to maximize floor space on a small plot of land, but it has the secondary effect of creating a kind of wooden canyon, deepening the shadows and making the strip of sky above seem very far away. You quickly learn the cardinal rule of walking in a city like this. Always keep an ear open for the slosh of a bucket and a shout from a window above. The sanitation system is, shall we say, rather more direct than you're used to. It adds another complex layer to the city's already rich tapestry of smells. Here, the scent of the sea is muted, replaced by the smells of daily life. The warm, comforting aroma of rye bread baking wafts from the open door of a communal bakery. A few doors down, the clean, sharp scent of fresh sawdust tells you a carpenter is at work, his shavings piling up in pale curls on the cobblestones. There's also the slightly acrid smell of lye soap and boiling laundry. And beneath it all, the persistent, damp, earthy odor from the central gutter that runs down the middle of the street. It's a lot to take in, a full-body immersion into a time before sterile packaging and hidden plumbing. You press a hand against the wall of a house as you pass, feeling the rough texture of the lime-washed plaster and the solid, unyielding timber frame beneath it. The wood is the skeleton of this city. It's in the ships, the houses, the carts, the tools, the very barrels holding the water and beer. Scandinavia, with its vast, seemingly endless forests, built its world from trees. You find a modest lodging house, its sign a crudely painted tankard, and step inside. The air is thick with wood smoke from the large hearth that dominates the common room. The fire is the heart of the home, the source of heat, the primary light after sundown, and the place for all cooking. It's a comfort, and you can't help but think, a constant and terrifying fire hazard in a city made almost entirely of kindling. The room is simple. A long, heavy trestle table is surrounded by a few backless stools. The floor is made of wide, rough-hewn planks, worn smooth in paths between the door, the hearth, and the stairs. A cast-iron pot bubbles over the flames, and the air is close and warm. You realize this single space is the 18th century equivalent of a multi-purpose room. It has a kitchen, a dining room, a living room, and a social club all in one. The original studio apartment, really, just with significantly more smoke. Your own small room upstairs is stark. A rope bed with a straw-stuffed mattress, a small wooden chest for your belongings, and a single chair. And most importantly, a window. It's a small one facing the back alley, but it's there. Through its wavy, leaded panes, you can see the red-tiled roof of the building opposite. In some of the poorer homes you passed, you noticed that not all windows were made of glass. You'd seen some openings covered with a translucent membrane of stretched and oiled pig or sheep bladder. It was a cheap, if rather morbid, substitute for the real thing, letting in a murky, diffused light but keeping out the worst of the wind and rain. It serves as a stark reminder that clear glass, the kind that lets you truly see the world outside, is a mark of prosperity. As you sit in the quiet of your room, you can feel the thrum of the continent around you. This era, the early 1700s, is a tumultuous one. For decades, the kingdoms of the North have been embroiled in the Great Northern War, a sprawling and brutal conflict that pitted a coalition led by Russia against the mighty Swedish Empire. Sweden, under its warrior king Charles XIV, had been the dominant military power in the Baltic, but this long war has bled it dry, both in manpower and in treasure. Denmark-Norway, where you might be, has been deeply involved, fighting to reclaim lost territories. The war has reshaped the map of Northern Europe and left every participating nation's treasury perilously empty. That is the larger story humming just beneath the surface of the everyday life you're witnessing. The cost of all those cannons and campaigns and brightly colored uniforms has to be paid. The debts of kings have a way of trickling down, eventually landing on the shoulders of the carpenters, the bakers, and the women doing their needlework in the soft light of their windows. You can't feel it yet, but the consequences of that distant war are gathering like a storm cloud, and it's about to change the very way this city looks and feels. As evening settles over the city, the light in your small room begins to fail. A servant brings a single tallow candle, its smoky, sputtering flame casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. It smells faintly of animal fat. This single, precious flame is your link to the visual world after dark. Now, from the quiet simplicity of your lodgings, you let your mind drift across the city, towards the source of all power and, as it happens, all problems, the royal palace. It's a place you've only seen from a distance, a sprawling complex of stone and brick with perfectly manicured gardens and ornate, gilded gates that seem to glow even in the twilight. It's another world entirely, one that operates on a different set of principles from the cobbled streets and timber-framed houses you've just explored. Imagine the scene inside those palace walls tonight. While you have your one smoky candle, the grand halls of the palace are ablaze with the light of 1,000 beeswax candles. Their clean, sweet scent a subtle mark of immense wealth. The sheer cost of this light alone could probably feed a dozen families for a year. Courtiers drift through the vast, chilly rooms, their powdered wigs immaculate, their coats and gowns made of shimmering silks and velvets in vibrant colors. It's the height of fashion and also the height of impracticality. All that finery looks splendid, but you suspect it does little to ward off the persistent drafts that snake through these cavernous spaces. They gather in small, whispering groups, their conversations a delicate ballet of flattery, gossip, and political maneuvering. The air hums with the sound of a string quartet playing in a distant chamber, a refined soundtrack to the endless performance of courtly life. This entire spectacle, from the liveried servants to the imported wine in the crystal goblets, is designed for one purpose: to project power. This is the age of absolute monarchy, the political theory that a monarch holds supreme authority, unrestricted by any laws, legislature, or customs. The king, whether it's Frederick IV in Copenhagen or his contemporaries, is not just the head of state, he is the state. His health is the nation's health, his glory is the nation's glory, and most importantly, his debts are the nation's debts. It's a great gig if you can get it, really. Any complaints about your spending habits can just be redirected as questioning the divine plan. But the divine plan, it seems, has not accounted for basic arithmetic. The kingdom is broke. Decades of warfare, like the recently concluded Great Northern War, have been ruinously expensive. Maintaining a modern army and navy, with its foundries casting cannons, its shipyards building warships, and its soldiers needing pay, powder, and provisions, has stretched the royal treasury to its breaking point. And while the war may be over, the bills are now coming due. The traditional sources of income just aren't cutting it anymore. The rents from crown lands are fixed, and the customs duties from the port, while significant, fluctuate with the whims of trade and weather. The state's financial advisors, men in slightly less ostentatious wigs, are facing a monumental challenge. You can just picture the royal treasurer, sweating nervously in his woolen coat, trying to delicately explain to a man who believes he was chosen by God that spending more money than you have is, technically speaking, a poor long-term strategy. The monarchy needs new streams of revenue, and it needs them now. They've already taxed salt, paper, and other basic goods, but these are hitting the poorest the hardest and aren't raising enough. They need a broader tax, something that can be easily assessed and collected, something that reflects a person's ability to pay. The problem is, how do you measure wealth in an era before income tax returns and detailed financial records? You cannot easily know what a merchant earns or what a nobleman has stored in his cellars. You need a visible public proxy for prosperity, something you can count from the street. Political economists still debate the effectiveness of 18th century mercantilist policies, the dominant theory of the day which saw national wealth as a finite pie to be hoarded. But for the men tasked with filling the king's coffers, the theory is simple: find the wealth and find a way to take a piece of it for the crown. The search is on for a new, ingenious, and inescapable way to levy the populace, and it is this desperate search that will soon lead them to a truly peculiar idea. They will stop looking at what people own and start looking at how they live. The next morning you find yourself walking through the same streets, but something has shifted in your perception. The city is the same, the sounds and smells are the same, but you're looking at it with the eyes of a royal treasurer. You're no longer just seeing buildings, you're seeing assets. You're no longer just admiring the beautiful shimmering light, you're trying to figure out how to put a price on it. As you pass a grand merchant's house on a corner, its facade a proud declaration of success, you find yourself unconsciously counting its windows. 1, 2, 3 on the ground floor, 4 on the one above, another 4 on the next, 3 smaller ones in the attic dormers, 14 windows, just on the front face. Then you look at the modest craftsman's workshop next door, a large window for his work, and perhaps 2 small ones for the living quarters above. 3 in total. And further down, a tenement, crowded with families, might have a dozen windows, but they are shared amongst many households. You are beginning to see the logic, the cold, beautiful, and catastrophically flawed logic that is starting to crystallize in a committee room in the palace. The king's ministers poring over maps and ledgers have found their solution. It's simple, it's elegant, it's almost foolproof. They are going to tax windows. On the surface, it seems like a stroke of genius. Think of the problem from their perspective. They need a tax that is progressive, meaning it hits the rich harder than the poor. They need one that is easy to assess, without an army of intrusive officials going through people's private homes and account books. And they need one that is difficult to evade. The window tax, or Fönsterskatt, seems to tick all the boxes. First, it's a clear proxy for wealth. The core assumption is that a bigger house means a richer owner, and a bigger house naturally has more windows. The poor live in small, dark homes with 1 or 2 windows at most. The burgeoning middle class of merchants and master craftsmen live in comfortable homes with a respectable number. The aristocracy and the wealthiest burghers live in grand houses with dozens of them. Therefore, a tax based on the number of windows a dwelling possesses should, in theory, scale perfectly with the owner's ability to pay. It's a tax on prosperity, and the evidence of that prosperity is right there on the outside of the building for everyone to see. Second, it's remarkably simple to administer. You don't need highly trained accountants. You just need a man who can walk, see, and count. It's the perfect government job for someone who finds complex paperwork a bit of a chore. The tax assessor, or inspector, can simply walk down a street, ledger in hand, and tally up the windows on each and every building. No need for warrants, no need to disturb the occupants. It's clean, efficient, and public. Remember that glass we talked about? The expensive, fragile luxury? Taxing windows is also by extension a tax on the very material of glass, reinforcing the idea that it's a levy on consumption and luxury. They were likely looking at other nations for inspiration. The infamous English window tax had been in effect since 1696, providing a working model. It was, for a time, considered a very modern and sophisticated form of taxation. Historians and economists still debate whether these kinds of sumptuary taxes were more effective as revenue generators or as tools of social engineering, subtly encouraging a more modest and less ostentatious society. But for the king's men, the goal was purely financial. And the best part? A window is a hole in a wall. It's a fundamental part of the building's structure. You can't just stick it in your pocket and hide it when the taxman comes calling. It's a permanent, unmovable, and highly visible feature. The logic is beautiful in its simplicity. And in that smoke-filled room in the palace, surrounded by maps and charts, it must have sounded like the perfect, unbreakable solution to all the kingdom's financial woes. They had forgotten, however, to account for the single most powerful and creative force in the known universe: human beings really not wanting to pay taxes. A few weeks pass. The rhythm of the city continues its steady beat. The clang of the smithy, the rumble of the carts, the calls of the gulls. But there's an undercurrent of nervous energy, a tension in the air, like the stillness before a thunderstorm. Rumors have been slithering through the taverns and marketplaces, whispers of a new royal tax, something big and unavoidable. No one knows the details, and this uncertainty only fuels the anxiety. Then one morning, the sharp, insistent rattle of a drum echoes from the main square. It's a sound that cuts through the everyday noise, a summons that cannot be ignored. You abandon your errand and follow the growing stream of people, a river of humanity flowing towards the heart of the city. The square is already crowded. You find a spot near the steps of the great stone church, giving you a vantage point over the sea of heads. Everyone is here. Merchants in their dark, respectable wool coats, tradesmen with the dust of their workshops still on their aprons, women with market baskets on their arms, and clusters of sailors on shore leave looking for a bit of excitement. In the center of the square, on a small wooden platform, stands the town crier. He's a man with a barrel chest and a face made ruddy by the wind and, you suspect, a fair amount of ale. He has a voice that could curdle milk from 50 paces, which is perfect for a job that mostly involves delivering bad news. He is flanked by 2 uniformed soldiers, their impassive faces and polished muskets a clear signal that this is not a negotiation. The drum falls silent. The crier unfurls a large scroll, its official wax seal dangling like a drop of dried blood. He takes a deep theatrical breath and bellows the traditional opening, "Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes." The crowd hushes. This was the primary method of mass communication in the 18th century. The town crier was the state's official broadcast, a walking, talking newspaper and government gazette all in one. He begins to read, his voice booming across the square. The proclamation is written in the grand, looping, and almost impenetrable language of the royal bureaucracy. It speaks of the continued prosperity and security of this great kingdom, of the solemn duties of the crown, and of the necessity for a fair and equitable levy upon the property of all subjects. It is a masterclass in saying, "We are taking more of your money in the most noble-sounding way imaginable." The crowd listens, a collective frown of concentration on their faces, trying to cut through the verbal foliage to get to the root of the matter. And then he reaches the crucial part. The new tax will be levied not on land, not on income, not on goods, but on the number of windows in every dwelling within the city walls and throughout the kingdom. A brief, profound silence hangs in the air as 100 minds process this bizarre new reality. You can almost hear the gears turning. Then, a low murmur begins, a ripple of sound that quickly grows into a wave of disbelief and anger. You see a man next to you, a baker by the flower on his clothes, look up at the grand guild hall that lines one side of the square. His eyes dart from window to window, his lips moving as he silently counts. His face, which was merely curious a moment ago, is now pale with shock. Suddenly, everyone in the square becomes a lightning-fast mental accountant, and from the looks on their faces, nobody is happy with the results of their internal audit. The proclamation isn't finished. It goes on to detail the tiered rates, the exemptions for dairies and cellars, the penalties for non-compliance. But few are listening to the finer points. The core truth has landed like a cannonball. You can hear snippets of angry, worried conversation erupting all around you. 7 windows. 7. That's half a week's profit. Does a glazed door count? What about a skylight? This is madness. Sheer madness. The sense of injustice is immediate and palpable. Light, the sun, the very air. It feels as though the king has found a way to tax something that should be as free as the rain. Social historians debate the extent to which these new forms of taxation were a primary driver of popular unrest. But standing here, in this suddenly furious crowd, you can feel that a line has been crossed. A deep, foundational sense of fairness has been violated, and the city's mood has soured in an instant. The decree has been read. The law is the law, and a cold dread settles in your stomach as you realize that nothing in this bright, sun-catching city will ever be the same again. The crowd dissolves, not with a riotous bang, but with a low, angry hum like a disturbed hornet's nest. People break off into small, agitated groups, voices low and urgent, gestures sharp and angry. The proclamation is over, but the conversation has just begun, and it will likely continue for months and years to come. You walk back towards your lodging house, the town crier's words still ringing in your ears, the formal official phrases now feeling like a personal insult. The sun is high and bright, but a shadow has fallen over the city, a shadow of ink and legislation. When you reach the familiar street, you stop. You look up at the building you've been calling a temporary home, and you see it in a completely new light. It's no longer just a place of shelter. It is now a tax liability. The innkeeper is standing outside, a portly man named Henrik, who usually has a cheerful word for everyone. Today his face is grim, his arms crossed over his expansive apron. He is staring up at his own property with an expression of profound betrayal, as if the building itself has conspired against him. He looks at his windows as you might look at a beloved pet that just ate the rent money. Without a word, you both begin the same dreadful task. You begin to count. You start at the front. 2 large windows on the ground floor flank the main door, their glass panes designed to make the common room look warm and inviting to weary travelers. That's 2. On the next floor there are 3 windows for the guest rooms. That makes 5. Above that, 2 more, 7. And a small round window and oil de boeuf set in the gable. 8. You walk around to the side alley, a window for the kitchen often propped open to let out the steam and smoke. 9. A tiny one, barely a slit, for the pantry. Does that one count? You need an advanced degree in both architecture and philosophy to figure out if your pantry vent technically qualifies as a taxable aperture. For now, you assume the worst. 10. The back of the building has another 3 windows for the rooms there, including your own. 13. And 1 more on the stairwell landing, to stop people from breaking their necks in the dark. 14 windows in total. Later, you see a copy of the official proclamation, a broadside crudely nailed to a post. The rules, when you finally decipher the dense legal script, are just as the rumors suggested. The tax is tiered, a ladder of escalating financial pain. Dwellings with fewer than 6 windows are exempt, a token gesture to the absolute poorest. From 6 to 9 windows, the tax is a set manageable sum per year. But then comes the jump. Once you have 10 windows, the rate per window more than doubles. And for buildings with 20 or more, the rate becomes truly punitive, a sum designed to be paid only by the genuinely wealthy. This lodging house, with its 14 windows, has fallen squarely into the second, much more painful bracket. It's a system designed to make the rich pay their share, but its more immediate effect is to create a terrifying incentive to never, ever be the person who owns a building with exactly 10 windows. Economic historians continue to analyze the true progressivity of the window tax, debating whether it truly soaked the rich as intended. Some argue that in practice it disproportionately burdened the urban middle class, the shopkeepers, the merchants, the innkeepers like Henrik, while the true aristocracy, with their vast country estates, often had their properties assessed under different and far more lenient rules. Standing here, you can see the brutal math of it. Henrik's 14 windows have just become 14 small leaks, through which his hard-earned money will now drain away into the king's coffers. Each pane of glass, which yesterday was a source of light and cheer, has become a small, transparent tax collector, staring back at him. He lets out a long, slow breath. 14, he says to no one in particular. 14 little nails for my coffin. The abstract anger of the town square has now curdled into a very specific, personal, and gut-wrenching anxiety. And all over the city, in every home and workshop, this same miserable calculation is being performed. A quiet, citywide audit of impending financial doom. It doesn't take long. The city, having performed its grim and silent calculations, now begins to take action. A new sound starts to echo through the narrow, cobbled streets, a sound that quickly becomes as common as the cry of the gulls or the rumble of a cart. It's the sharp, rhythmic chink, chink, chink of a mason's trowel striking brick, followed by the wet, scraping sound of mortar being slathered into place. At first, it's just an isolated noise from a nearby lane, but within a week, it has grown into a city-wide chorus. It is the sound of the city blinding itself. From your window, you see it happening across the way. The owner of a small textile workshop, a man you've seen 100 times but never spoken to, is standing on the street below, arms crossed, directing 2 workmen. They are on a wooden scaffold, methodically dismantling one of his second-story windows. First, the delicate leaded casement is carefully prized from its frame. The glass panes, so valuable just a month ago, are now a liability. They are passed down and stacked with a reverence that seems almost ironic under the circumstances. Then, the heavy wooden frame is knocked out, leaving a gaping rectangular wound in the wall. And then the masons begin their work. Brick by methodical brick, they seal the opening, transforming what was once a source of light and air into a flat, blank expanse of wall. The new bricks are a raw, angry red against the building's weathered, time-stained facade. It looks like a fresh scar. The whole process is conducted with a kind of grim resignation. There is no joy of construction here, no pride in the work. It's more like a painful but necessary surgery. The masons, who are usually employed to build grand things, are now finding steady work in the slightly less glamorous field of architectural negation. It's a sudden booming trade, born entirely from a desire to avoid the taxman. Architectural historians debate whether the bricking up phenomenon was a purely pragmatic response to the tax, or if it also carried an element of protest, a visible and permanent statement of defiance against an unpopular law. Watching the workshop owner's pained expression, it feels like both. He is paying good money to make his own property objectively worse, darker, and less pleasant, all to avoid paying even more to the king. Soon enough, the sound of the masons arrives at your own lodging house. Henrik, the innkeeper, has made his agonizing decision. He has 14 windows. To fall into the lower, survivable tax bracket, he must have 9. 5 windows have to go. You watch as he paces the hallways, his face a mask of misery, choosing which parts of his building to condemn to darkness. It's a terrible new game show he's forced to play. Do you sacrifice the morning light in a guest room, or the cross breeze in the kitchen? There are no good choices. He decides finally to sacrifice the window on the main stairwell, 2 in the back guest rooms that have the worst view anyway, the tiny pantry window, and 1 from the small private parlor. The work begins. The loss of the stairwell window is felt immediately. The passage, once gloomy, is now plunged into a near-perpetual twilight. You find yourself trailing a hand along the wall to guide your way, and the simple act of going up or down stairs now feels vaguely treacherous. The 2 guest rooms at the back are transformed from modest lodgings into claustrophobic, airless cells. You cannot imagine who would pay to sleep in a room with no connection to the outside world. Henrik has saved himself from a ruinous tax bill, but he has brutalized his own building in the process. The new blank patches of brick on the exterior are ugly, but the real damage is on the inside. It's a change you can feel in the air, a new sense of confinement, a permanent gloom that even the brightest summer day will no longer be able to erase. Now that the first frantic wave of architectural surgery is over, a more complex and subtle picture of the city's new reality begins to emerge. The initial panicked response of bricking up windows to fall below the dreaded 10-window threshold was just the first chapter. Now you begin to notice the nuanced and often painful choices being made, especially in the commercial heart of the city. You find yourself walking along the main trading street, the one lined with the workshops and storefronts of the city's most respected artisans and merchants. Before the tax, this street was a vibrant, glittering artery, its shop windows filled with the best goods the city had to offer, a feast for the eyes designed to entice and impress. Now it's a study in economic anguish. For a private homeowner, a window is a source of light and air. For a merchant, it is a vital organ of commerce. The large, street-level window of a draper, a silversmith, or a baker is their primary form of advertising. It's a silent, constant conversation with the public. It says, "Look at the fine quality of my wares. See the rich colors of this silk, the brilliant shine of this silver, the golden crust of this bread. I am prosperous and successful. You can trust the goods you buy here." To remove that window is to cut out your own tongue. It's a self-inflicted wound that could cripple your business far more than the tax itself. This is the merchant's dilemma, and you can see it written on the very faces of the buildings. You pass the shop of a well-known silversmith. His large, multi-paned window is still there, sparkling in the sun. Inside, you can see ornate tankards and gleaming candlesticks arranged on dark velvet. He has chosen to weather the storm, to absorb the crippling cost of the tax. Keeping the window has now become a deliberate and powerful statement. It is the 18th century equivalent of buying the most expensive carriage or wearing the finest silk. It is a form of conspicuous consumption, that tells the world his business is so robust that he can afford to pay the king's ransom for this single sheet of glass. He is not just selling silver, he is selling an image of unshakable stability. A few doors down, you see a different strategy. A draper's shop, once fronted by two wide windows showing off bolts of colorful cloth, has made a painful compromise. One window has been completely bricked up, leaving a stark blank patch on the facade. The other has been partially filled in, leaving a much smaller vertical slit of a window, just wide enough to display a single bolt of fabric. It's the architectural equivalent of a bad lopsided haircut. It looks awkward and sad, a visible representation of the merchant's reluctant capitulation. He's trying to have it both ways, maintaining a sliver of his commercial presence while desperately trying to reduce his tax burden. Further on, the worst-case scenario. A master cobbler, whose sign of a finely crafted leather boot still hangs above his door, has bricked up his display window entirely. The ground floor of his shop is now a forbidding, featureless wall. The business is still operating. You can hear the tap of his hammer from within, but from the street it feels dead, unwelcoming. You have no idea what his wares look like, and you feel a distinct lack of encouragement to even open the door and find out. Window shopping, once a pleasant city pastime, has become a much less interesting activity. Your choice is now between looking at a rich man's silver or a poor man's bricks. Urban historians debate how much the window tax may have inadvertently accelerated changes in retail practice, perhaps forcing merchants to invest more in other forms of advertising like the large painted trade signs that were so crucial in a society with low literacy rates. You see the members of the various guilds, the bakers, the weavers, the metalsmiths, talking in anxious huddles outside their grand guild halls. These powerful organizations, which controlled all trade within the city, are now facing a collective crisis. Their own halls, built to project the wealth and power of their craft, are laden with dozens of taxable windows. The tax is not just an attack on individuals, it's an attack on the commercial identity of the entire urban middle class, forcing them into an impossible choice between visibility and solvency. You leave the main commercial avenues behind, turning into a maze of ever-narrowing side streets and alleys. The air changes here. The clean, salty breeze from the harbor doesn't penetrate this deep into the city's dense fabric. The smells are of boiled cabbage, damp wool, and the ever-present foul odor of the open gutters, which are more clogged and neglected here than elsewhere. The buildings themselves seem to grow taller, leaning in towards each other until they almost block out the sky, creating a world of permanent shadow. This is where the city's laborers, dock workers, and servants live, the vast, unseen engine that powers the prosperous city you first encountered. And it is here that the window tax, a law supposedly designed to target the wealthy, reveals its cruelest and most tragic irony. On paper, the law seemed to have a conscience. Dwellings with fewer than 6 windows were exempt, a clause specifically written to spare the poor. But the king's ministers, in their clean, well-lit offices, failed to understand a fundamental reality of urban poverty. The poor did not live in charming little cottages with 4 or 5 windows. They lived as tenants crammed into enormous subdivided tenement buildings. These structures, sometimes housing 20 or 30 families, were owned by a single landlord. And while the building might have 30 or 40 windows in total, placing it in the highest, most ruinous tax bracket, the landlord was often not a rich man himself. He was frequently just a small-time investor, a retired merchant perhaps, whose entire livelihood depended on the meager rents he could collect. This landlord now faced an impossible choice. He could not possibly absorb the massive new tax bill himself. His only options were to pass the cost on to his tenants in the form of massively increased rent, which he knew they could never pay, or to take the same drastic action as everyone else. But his calculations were not about saving a bit of profit. They were about avoiding total bankruptcy, and so he did the only thing he could. He hired the masons. The tax was designed to miss the poor, and in a way it did. It missed the poor and hit their landlord like a battering ram, who then had no choice but to pass the ensuing misery downstairs. As you walk through these dark lanes, the results are devastating. You see entire tenement facades that have been almost completely bricked over. The landlords have performed a brutal architectural triage, sealing every single window that was not absolutely essential for a room to be legally habitable, and sometimes, you suspect, even more. A building that once had 40 windows might now have 10, its face a grotesque mask of brick and mortar. The exemption for the poor has become a trap, creating the very conditions it was meant to prevent. Overcrowding and poor sanitation were already the norm in these 18th century slums, creating a perfect breeding ground for diseases like typhus and tuberculosis. The window tax didn't create these problems, but it acted as a powerful accelerant, making a terrible situation catastrophically worse. You peer through a dark open doorway into a common hallway. There are no windows here at all. The air is thick, stale, and cold, even on a bright day. You can hear the cough of an unseen resident, a dry, racking sound that echoes in the darkness. You can only imagine the rooms themselves, whole families, a mother, a father, 5 or 6 children, living in a single room that now has no source of natural light or fresh air. A box, a tomb. It's a darkness that is more than just the absence of light. It is the absence of health, the absence of hope. Sociologists might debate modern theories of urban decay, but here, the cause and effect are brutally simple. The state, in its quest for revenue, has stolen the sun from its most vulnerable citizens, plunging them into a literal and metaphorical darkness that will have consequences for generations to come. Leaving the oppressive, narrow darkness of the tenements behind, you emerge into a different city altogether. The streets here are wide, paved with smooth, well-maintained stones, and lined with young trees. The air is cleaner. The houses, or rather the mansions, do not huddle together for support. They stand alone, proud and aloof, separated from the common street by ornate wrought iron fences and manicured gardens. This is the aristocratic quarter, a world of quiet, generational wealth and immense political power. And here, the window tax is not a story of misery and darkness, but a story of something else entirely. A story of pride, defiance, and the theater of social status. You stop before a particularly grand residence, a city palace built of pale, carved stone. It's a masterpiece of symmetry and proportion, and its facade is an extravagant celebration of the window. There must be 40 or 50 of them. Great arched windows on the main floor, the piano nobile where the noble family would entertain, are tall enough for a person to walk through. Smaller, though still generous, windows adorn the floors above and below. Not a single one has been touched. There are no ugly scars of new brickwork, no signs of compromise. The glass in every pane is impossibly clear, sparkling in the sun, each one a tiny, glittering jewel. The owner's annual tax bill for this display must be astronomical, enough to fund a small military campaign or at least a very, very luxurious picnic. For the aristocracy and the fabulously wealthy, the window tax was not the crushing burden it was for everyone else. It was an opportunity. In a society built on a rigid hierarchy, every aspect of life was a performance, a way to demonstrate your place in the great chain of being. And the window tax provided a spectacular new stage for this performance. Bricking up a window for a nobleman would have been an unthinkable public admission of financial strain. It would be a confession of weakness, a crack in the carefully maintained facade of effortless superiority. It would be the 18th century equivalent of selling the family silver to pay the butcher. It simply wasn't done. So they did the opposite. They paid the tax. They paid it willingly, almost disdainfully, as if the sum were a minor annoyance. By keeping every single one of their windows, they were engaging in what sociologists would later call conspicuous consumption. It was a silent, but incredibly loud declaration to the rest of the world. This law, which is bringing merchants to their knees and plunging the poor into darkness, means nothing to me. My wealth is so profound, so unshakable, that your crisis is my pocket money. The tax, intended as a revenue tool, was thus co-opted by the elite and transformed into another instrument for reinforcing the vast, unbridgeable chasm between them and everyone else. Historians of class and culture often debate the motivations behind such aristocratic spending. Was this refusal to brick up windows a cold, calculated act of social dominance, a way to rub their superiority in the faces of the lower classes? Or was it simply a matter of a deeply ingrained aesthetic sense, a belief that a grand house simply must be symmetrical and full of light, and any other consideration was beneath them? Standing here watching a liveried servant meticulously polishing the brass handle on the immense front door, it feels like a mixture of both. For you, a window is a tax. For the merchant, it's a dilemma. For the nobleman, it's just another Tuesday. He does not resent the window for its cost, he values it for the statement that cost allows him to make. He has taken a tax designed to bleed him and turned it into a trophy. The city has settled into a new, stranger version of itself. The initial frantic flurry of bricklaying has subsided, leaving behind a cityscape scarred with patches of new masonry. But now, a different kind of work is beginning. After the shock and the desperate practicality of avoiding the tax, the irrepressible human desire for order, for beauty, for dignity, begins to reassert itself. You start to notice it in small ways at first. A homeowner, having bricked up a window and ruined the symmetry of his house, has painted the new patch of brick to match the color of the old, weathered wall around it, trying to make the scar less obvious. It's a small gesture, but it's a start. Then one day, walking down a street you've walked a dozen times, you see something that makes you stop and stare. It's a merchant's house, one of the ones that had made a painful compromise, bricking up one of a matching pair of windows on the second floor. But today the ugly patch of brick is gone. In its place there is a window. It's a perfect match for its real, functioning twin. It has the same white-painted frame, the same number of small panes, the same delicate shadow cast by the lintel above. But something is wrong. The light doesn't glint off the glass. The reflection of the clouds doesn't move. You step closer, your curiosity piqued, and with a jolt of delighted surprise you realize it's a painting. The entire window, frame, glass, shadow and all, is a masterful illusion, painted directly onto the flat brick surface. This is the peculiar and ingenious art of trompe-l'œil, a French term meaning to deceive the eye. It's a technique as old as painting itself, but it has now found a new and urgent purpose on the wounded facades of your city. The painted window was not an attempt to fool the tax collector. He was a practical man who counted holes, not paintings. You could have a masterpiece by a Dutch master on your wall, but if there was no opening behind it, it didn't count. No, the illusion was for everyone else. It was for the neighbors, for the passers-by, and for the owner himself. It was a matter of aesthetics and pride. A building with a lopsided, asymmetrical face looked wrong. It looked unbalanced. More than that, it looked poor. The blank patch of brick was a public announcement of your financial struggles, a scar that everyone could see. The painted window was a way to restore the home's integrity. It was a fiction that told a deeper truth about the owner's aspirations. It said, "I may have been forced by this unjust law to seal this opening, but I have not surrendered my taste. I am a person of substance. I understand what a proper house is supposed to look like, and this is it." Once you've seen one, you start seeing them everywhere, a secret language written on the city walls. The quality varies wildly. Some are crude, little more than a black rectangle painted on the brickwork. Others are astonishingly detailed, created by skilled artisans. They paint intricate frames, delicate glazing bars, and even the subtle shadows the bars would cast on the inner sill. Some artists add whimsical touches, a painted cat sleeping on the sill, a half-open casement, or a curtain that seems to flutter in a non-existent breeze. The city is becoming a strange outdoor art gallery, full of ghost windows and phantom light. Art historians and social critics debate the meaning of the painted window. Was it a melancholy protest? A ghostly reminder of the light that had been stolen? Or was it a more resilient, optimistic gesture, an attempt to maintain civic beauty against all odds? As you look at the cleverly painted reflection of the sky in a window that isn't there, it feels like it is, somehow, both at once, awaiting continue. The painted window is a clever lie, a beautiful fiction that helps to hide the damage done to the city's existing buildings. It's a cosmetic fix for a deep, structural problem. But as the years tick by, a more profound and permanent change begins to take root. You start to see it on the edges of town, or in places where an old building has been torn down to make way for a new one. Construction sites, once a sign of progress and prosperity, now become a place to witness the birth of a strange and shadowy new kind of architecture. The tax is no longer just forcing people to modify old homes. It is now dictating the very design of new ones from the moment the first foundation stone is laid. You pause by a new townhouse being erected, one of a row of identical structures. The builders are at work and the building's timber skeleton is still visible. But something about its shape is immediately unsettling. It doesn't seem to follow the old sun-loving logic. The facade that faces the main street is respectable enough, planned with a neat, symmetrical arrangement of windows, probably 9 of them, you guess, landing the owner safely in the lower tax bracket. But the side of the building, the one that will eventually be hidden by its neighbor, is a sheer monolithic wall of brick. There isn't a single opening planned for it. The builder's new checklist seems to be, first, what is the absolute minimum number of windows we can get away with? Second, are you absolutely sure that's the final count? And third, okay, fine, now let's make the whole thing stand up. This radical change to the exterior forces an even more radical revolution on the inside. An architect's job is no longer to create pleasant, well-lit spaces. Their primary challenge now is to design a functional home while navigating a punitive tax code. The window tax has become the single most important design constraint. This leads to the creation of bizarre and often deeply impractical internal layouts. Instead of houses made up of a collection of squarish, sensible rooms, you now see the rise of the incredibly long, deep floor plan. You can see it in the skeleton of the building in front of you. It's narrow at the front, but it stretches back an incredible distance. The goal is to have one room, a salon, or a dining room, that is perhaps 50 feet long, lit by a single window at the very front. The part of the room near the street might be bright and cheerful, but the back of it will be a place of perpetual twilight. You'd need to pack a lunch to walk from one end to the other. This new style of designing for darkness gives birth to a host of strange innovations. You hear of architects building rooms in the core of the house with no exterior walls at all. These rooms might borrow light through internal windows or glazed doors connecting them to the brighter rooms at the front or back. These weren't taxed, so they became a crucial, if inefficient, way to share a few precious photons of light. Central corridors become longer and more common, but they are often little more than pitch-black tunnels, arteries of darkness connecting the few dimly lit extremities of the house. The Georgian and Victorian terraced houses in Great Britain are a famous example of this legacy. Their long, thin footprints and blank sidewalls a direct result of designing around their own long-running window tax. Architectural theorists still debate the long-term aesthetic legacy of this period. Did the constraints of the window tax lead to an age of architectural gloom and decline, a retreat from the sun? Or did it, in some perverse way, force a new kind of creativity, leading to clever new floor plans and a more strategic approach to interior design? Looking at the dark, cavernous space being framed out in front of you, it's hard to see it as a triumph of innovation. It looks compromised. It looks sad. A home is being built, but it is a home that seems to have a built-in resentment of the sun, a structure designed not to welcome the outside world, but to keep the taxman out. It's one thing to see the skeleton of these new, tax-efficient houses rising from the mud of a construction site. It's another thing entirely to step inside a finished one. An acquaintance, a mid-level merchant who has just moved into one of the fashionable new townhouses, invites you for a cup of coffee. He is immensely proud of his new home, boasting of its modern design and, in a lower voice, its very reasonable tax assessment. You accept the invitation, eager to experience this new world from the inside. From the street, the house looks respectable. The facade is handsome, with 4 large, well-proportioned windows on the 2 main floors and 2 smaller ones in the attic. 6 windows. A perfectly legal, financially prudent number. You step through the front door and into the main salon. The room is flooded with light from the 2 large windows that face the street. It's bright, airy, and expensively furnished. This is the public face of the home, the room designed to receive guests and project an image of comfortable prosperity. The owner beams with pride. But then he offers to give you a tour of the rest of the house, and your journey into the darkness begins. He leads you out of the salon and into the main corridor that runs through the spine of the house. The change is instantaneous and shocking. The temperature seems to drop several degrees. The light from the salon is swallowed by the gloom just a few feet from the doorway. Your eyes struggle to adjust. The air is still, thick, and smells faintly of damp plaster and candle wax. You have to navigate the hallway mostly by feel, a combination of echolocation and blind faith, trying not to bump into the dark shapes of furniture that line the walls. The owner, seemingly oblivious to the Stygian gloom, opens one of the doors off the hallway. "And this is my private study," he announces. You peer inside. The room is a small, perfect cube, perhaps 10 feet on each side. There is a desk, a chair, and a wall of bookshelves. There is no window. Even in the middle of this bright afternoon, the room is lit by a single sputtering tallow candle on the desk, its smoky flame casting a weak, flickering halo of light. The atmosphere is incredibly oppressive, like being in a sealed box. The sounds from the street are gone, replaced by a heavy, muffled silence. "Think of the privacy," the owner says, and you have to agree. The room is so private it isn't even sharing its existence with the sun. This is the lived reality of the new architecture. It's less a home and more a cave with a nice entryway. The owner points out a small pane of glass set high in the wall between the study and the corridor, a sad attempt to borrow a few stray photons of light from the darkness outside. It accomplishes almost nothing, offering only a faint, ghostly glimmer. Social historians and psychologists debate the mental health impact of light deprivation. But standing in this tiny, airless chamber, you don't need a study to tell you the effect. It feels profoundly unhealthy. The thought of spending hours in here, let alone an entire winter, is deeply unsettling. You continue your tour, a spelunking expedition through the house's dark core, passing other windowless chambers, a sewing room, a storage room, a small bedroom presumably for a servant. Finally, you reach the very back of the long house. The owner opens a door into the kitchen, and you feel an almost physical sense of relief. The room has a window, a single modest opening that looks out onto a tiny, high-walled yard. The pale, indirect light that fills the space feels as bright and welcoming as a sunrise. It's only by returning to the light that you realize how truly oppressive the rest of the house was. The tour is over. You have seen the future of domestic architecture, and it is a future of long, dark corridors, of stuffy, windowless rooms, and a constant, wearying reliance on the smoky, inadequate flame of a candle. Standing in that gloomy, candle-lit house, feeling the oppressive weight of its windowless walls, you can help but think about the remarkable substance at the heart of this entire crisis: glass. To us, it's ubiquitous, cheap, and invisible. To the people of the 18th century, it was a minor miracle, a fragile luxury born of fire and skill. Its high cost was a fundamental part of the government's justification for the tax. To understand why, you decide to seek out the source, a journey to a glassworks operating in a forest clearing a few miles outside the city walls. You can smell it before you see it, the sharp, acrid scent of immense quantities of burning wood. As you get closer, you feel the heat, a dry, radiating wave that makes the air shimmer. The glassworks is a large, barn-like structure, its roof pierced with a tall brick chimney, belching gray smoke into the sky. Inside, it's a vision of a controlled inferno. The air is thick with heat and roars with the sound of the great furnace, a beast built of brick and clay, its glowing mouth revealing the molten heart within. Workers, stripped to the waist and gleaming with sweat, move with a choreographed, almost dance-like precision around this fiery altar. You get as close as you dare, and immediately feel your eyebrows considering early retirement. It is not a workplace for the easily flammable. Here you witness the alchemy that turns common sand into a transparent solid. The master glassblower dips a long, hollow iron rod, a blowpipe, into the pot of molten glass inside the furnace. He pulls out a glowing, honey-like gob of liquid fire, then begins the skilled process of blowing and shaping. For window glass, the workers here use the crown glass method. The blower creates a hollow sphere, which is then transferred to a solid rod called a pontil. The blowpipe is cracked off, leaving a hole. The globe is reheated and then spun rapidly, faster and faster. You watch mesmerized as centrifugal force opens the hole and flattens the entire sphere into a large spinning disc of red-hot glass, sometimes 4 or 5 feet in diameter. This is the crown, and it is this fragile, shimmering disc that will become a dozen or so small window panes. Once cooled, the disc is cut into smaller pieces. But the process has inherent imperfections. The glass is not perfectly flat. It has ripples and waves from the spinning, which is why the view through an old window is always slightly watery and distorted. And in the very center where the pontile was attached, there is a thick, knobby lump of glass. The bullseye. This central piece was the cheapest part, and you often see it used in the windows of taverns or cellars, where light is needed but a clear view is not. The local sand here also has iron impurities, giving the finished product a distinct greenish hue, a type known as forest glass or walled glass. This entire operation is incredibly resource-intensive. The furnace must be kept at a scorching temperature day and night for weeks on end, consuming a small forest's worth of firewood. The potash, a key ingredient, is made by burning vast piles of hardwood down to ash, a laborious process in itself. And the glassblowers themselves are highly skilled, temperamental artisans, their knowledge a closely guarded secret. All of this, the fuel, the materials, the rare skill, made glass an expensive and prestigious product. Industrial historians debate when glass truly transitioned from luxury to commodity. But here in the 18th century, it is still firmly in the luxury camp, and that is why the king's ministers felt so clever. In their minds, they weren't taxing light or air. They were taxing a visible, high-status manufactured good, no different from taxing silk or silver. They had simply failed to predict that people, when forced, would choose the free and abundant darkness over the heavily taxed light. The consequences of the window tax are not merely architectural or economic. A far more insidious and invisible cost is slowly beginning to make itself known. A price tallied not in silver coins, but in human health. As the city becomes literally darker, a metaphorical shadow lengthens as well. You begin to notice it in the faces of the people you pass in the street, especially those emerging from the gloomy tenements of the poorer districts. There's a particular paleness to the skin, a weariness in the eyes, and you start to hear a sound that becomes a grim, persistent part of the city's audio landscape. A dry, hacking cough, echoing from a darkened doorway or a high, sealed-up room. The science of medicine in the 18th century is a world of guesswork and tradition. The prevailing wisdom is the miasma theory, the belief that diseases like cholera, typhus, and the plague are caused by miasma, a form of bad air filled with noxious particles from decaying matter. While they were wrong about the mechanism, the revolutionary concept of germs is still more than a century away. Their intuition was not entirely off. They correctly observed that the places that smelled the worst, the places with stagnant air, overcrowding, and poor sanitation, were the very same places where sickness festered, and the single best weapon against miasma was thought to be fresh, circulating air. A good cross breeze from an open window was seen as a vital, health-giving force that could sweep the bad air away. The window tax, therefore, was an unintentional but catastrophic assault on the primary public health strategy of the day. Every bricked-up window was another victory for the miasma. By eliminating cross-ventilation, the tax turned tens of thousands of homes into stagnant, sealed boxes. The air inside grew thick with the smoke of hearths and tallow candles, with moisture from cooking and washing, and with the exhaled breath of too many people living in too little space. These homes, especially the crowded tenements, became perfect incubators for airborne pathogens. The city was engaged in a massive, involuntary public health experiment with a hypothesis of what happens when we take away the sun and the wind. The initial results were not promising. One disease, above all others, thrives in these dark, damp, and crowded conditions. Tuberculosis, known in this era as consumption or the White Plague, it was already the single greatest killer in Europe. A slow, wasting disease that hollowed out its victims over months or years, leaving them with a persistent cough, fever, and a ghostly pallor. They didn't know it was caused by a bacterium, but they knew from bitter experience that it flourished in darkness and wilted in the sun. The window tax, by plunging a huge portion of the population into permanent gloom, was pouring gasoline on this already raging fire. Doctors would advise their consumptive patients to seek out fresh air and sunshine, the only treatments that seemed to offer any hope. It was excellent advice, except the government had just effectively reclassified fresh air and sunshine as luxury goods. Medical historians still debate the precise mortality impact of the window tax, as records from the time are often incomplete. While it's impossible to draw a direct causal line for every single death, there is a strong consensus that by worsening living conditions so dramatically, the tax created the ideal environment for tuberculosis to spread like wildfire. The cough you hear in the shadows is more than just a cough. It is the sound of a fiscal policy manifesting as a fatal disease, the quiet, tragic, and entirely predictable human cost of a tax on light. The persistent cough echoing from the shadows was not the only symptom of the city's growing sickness. Another, more silent and insidious ailment began to take hold, an affliction that attacks not the lungs of the old, but the very bones of the young. You start to see it as you walk through the darkest alleys where children huddle in doorways, their faces pale and listless. You notice the toddlers, the ones just learning to walk, have legs that are strangely curved, bowed outwards as if they cannot bear their own small weight. You see infants whose chests have a strange knobby appearance, and older children with swollen wrists and ankles who seem fragile and reluctant to run or play. This physical deformation is the unmistakable sign of rickets, a disease that softens and weakens the bones. In the 18th century, its cause was a profound mystery, often blamed on a poor diet, hereditary weakness, or the same bad air thought to cause so many other illnesses. Doctors were stumped. They recommended bizarre treatments ranging from cold baths to wearing metal corsets, none of which had any effect. The real cause was as simple as it was unavoidable in this new darkened world. Rickets is the direct result of a severe deficiency of vitamin D, and while a small amount of this vital nutrient can be found in certain foods, the human body is designed to produce the vast majority of it itself. It is a solar-powered process. Vitamin D is synthesized in our skin, a magical little bit of chemistry that happens only when we are exposed to the ultraviolet rays of the sun. The window tax, in its infinite wisdom, had effectively outlawed the sun by forcing hundreds of thousands of people, particularly the urban poor, to live in near-perpetual indoor darkness. The law had severed this ancient and essential link between humanity and the sky. Mothers and their infants, who would have spent much of their time indoors even in the best of circumstances, were now almost entirely cut off from direct sunlight. The small amount of light that might have filtered through a window was no longer there. This problem was made even more acute by the simple fact of geography. Here in Scandinavia, the sun is a more distant and fickle friend than in the south. The northern latitudes mean the sun's rays are weaker, and for the long, dark months of winter, they provide almost no useful UV radiation at all. People living here have a biological imperative to soak up as much sun as they possibly can during the bright summer months, storing up vitamin D in their bodies to last them through the winter. The tax was a direct assault on this fundamental survival strategy. Rickets became rampant. Known in Britain as the English disease for its prevalence in their own dark, industrializing cities, it left a permanent, physical mark on an entire generation. Nutritional historians still explore the complex factors behind the rickets epidemics, but the primary driver was the new sunless urban environment that laws like the window tax helped to create. The government, in its effort to tax the visible wealth of the city, had unintentionally imposed a second, invisible tax on the health of its children, a tax paid with the very shape of their bones. The strange, bow-legged walk of a child in a dark alley becomes another living, breathing indictment of a law that began as a simple accounting solution in a king-ass distant palace. The tax was now written not just on the brick and mortar of the city, but on the very bones of its children. This visible, physical toll, the scarred buildings, the coughing in the alleys, the crooked walk of a child, created a new and cruel social language. Before, a house was just a house. Now it was a public declaration, a billboard broadcasting your precise location in the kingdom's brutal economic and social hierarchy. As you walk the streets, you find you can no longer see a building without instinctively reading it, decoding the story it is being forced to tell. The city has become a giant, passive-aggressive architectural competition, where the goal is to appear as prosperous as possible without tipping into financial ruin. The number of windows on your home is no longer a matter of light or aesthetics. It is your credit score, your family's honor, and your social standing all rolled into one and put on display for the entire world to judge. People used to assess you by the quality of your coat or the shine on your boots. Now they just count your windows from across the street. It's a far more efficient and far more brutal method of social calculus. You can now read the city's class structure with a single glance. A tenement building in the poor quarter, its face a nearly blank mask of brick, signifies more than just poverty. It speaks of a landlord on the edge of bankruptcy and tenants living in a dark, disease-ridden environment. It is a sign of utter destitution. A little further up the ladder, you see the homes of the lower middle class, the careful craftsmen and clerks. Their houses are often meticulously maintained but display exactly 9 windows. This is the architecture of prudence, a clear signal that the family is respectable and solvent, but must sacrifice the luxury of light to remain so. It is the look of managed anxiety. Then there is the more complex signal of the painted trompe-l'oeil window. This tells a story of aspiration. The owner was hit hard enough by the tax to have to brick up a real window, but they still possess the pride and the disposable income to hire an artist to hide the scar. It's a declaration that says, we may be struggling, but we have not surrendered our taste. We are not common. It is the mark of the anxious but ambitious bourgeoisie, desperately trying to keep up appearances. This speaks to the powerful drive of social emulation, the desire of the rising middle class to imitate the tastes and lifestyles of the aristocracy, a game the window tax made infinitely more difficult. The wealthy merchant, by contrast, plays a different game. By keeping his large, gleaming shop windows and defiantly paying the tax, he advertises his own success. His windows are a guarantee of his solvency, a sign to customers and creditors that his business is robust. And at the very top, the nobleman's mansion, ablaze with dozens of untroubled windows, is the ultimate expression of power. It declares that its owner is above the petty concerns of merchants and commoners, a being who operates in a different sphere, immune to the laws that crush lesser men. Social historians debate whether the tax simply reinforced this existing class structure or, by making it so nakedly visible, actually increased resentment. Standing here, reading the blatant inequality written on the walls, you suspect it did a bit of both. The tax has turned every private home into a public ledger, exposing the financial secrets of its inhabitants and adding a heavy new layer of stigma and status anxiety to the simple act of living. Faced with a law that was socially humiliating, financially crippling, and physically sickening, it was only natural that people would eventually move beyond passive acceptance or aesthetic workarounds. A quiet and cunning rebellion began to simmer just beneath the surface of the city's life. It wasn't a rebellion of riots in the streets or protests in the square, but 1,000 tiny individual acts of defiance, a battle of wits waged against the king's tax collectors. You hear the stories whispered in taverns and over market stalls, tales of clever schemes and narrow escapes from the dreaded inspector. The tax collector himself becomes a recurring character in the city's drama. He is not necessarily an evil man, but a functionary, a bureaucrat armed with a ledger, a measuring tape, and an unyielding set of rules. He is the most feared man in the city, not because he carries a sword, but because he carries a clipboard. He can ruin a family's fortunes with a single casual tick of his pen. He roams the streets, his eyes scanning the facades, counting, measuring, and assessing, the human embodiment of the state's intrusive gaze. And it is this man that your fellow citizens are now trying to outsmart. The simplest methods are the riskiest. Some homeowners try to temporarily conceal their windows just before the inspector's annual visit. You might see a house where the owner has hastily nailed heavy shutters closed and then applied a thin layer of plaster and dirt around the edges, hoping it will pass for a permanent bricking up from a distance. It's a desperate gamble. If the inspector is suspicious and the ruse is discovered, the fines are severe. It leads to a new seasonal ritual. Spring cleaning, followed by the frantic annual pretend this half of the house doesn't exist festival. The more ingenious methods involve not hiding the window, but arguing it out of existence by exploiting loopholes in the law. The government, in its effort to be precise, had to define exactly what constituted a window. This legalistic language became a battleground. An unglazed opening for ventilating a cheese larder, is that legally a window or merely a vent? The law might have specific exemptions for dairies, as ventilation was essential. Suddenly, people all over the city discovered that their small windowed pantries were, in fact, crucial cheese-aging facilities. "No, Mr. Tax Collector, you can't tax this opening. This is for my dairy." Older buildings with large windows divided by stone mullions presented another gray area. Is that one large taxable opening, or two smaller, untaxed ones? People began installing new thick wooden posts in the middle of their windows, arguing that they had fundamentally changed their nature. It became a game of architectural sophistry, and in newly built homes, the most audacious would sometimes install a secret window, one completely hidden from the street, and then build a large piece of furniture, like a heavy wardrobe, to conceal it from the inside. The room would be legally windowless, but when the coast was clear, the furniture could be moved aside to let in a shaft of illegal, untaxed sunlight. Legal historians debate whether this widespread evasion was a sign of a breakdown in civic order or a form of early unorganized civil disobedience, a popular assertion of a natural right to light against the arbitrary power of the state. Whatever the motive, it transformed the city into a landscape of secrets, lies, and clever architectural deceptions. This quiet war of wits between the citizen and the state, this strange architectural language of shame and defiance, was not just a local skirmish. Through conversations with merchants and sailors who have traveled widely, you come to learn that the very same battles were being fought, often with even greater intensity, just across the North Sea in Great Britain. The peculiar Scandinavian tax that has turned your world upside down, you discover, is not so peculiar after all. It's a copy, an imported idea from a place where this policy was older, more entrenched, and even more despised. You have to hand it to the British. They were the true innovators in this particular field of fiscal misery. Their own window tax had been established way back in 1696, and it would endure for an astonishing 151 years, finally being repealed in 1851. Because it lasted for so long, its effects on architecture and society were even more profound. It became a miserable fact of life, a multi-generational burden that shaped the way entire cities were built. The tax was so universally hated that it famously earned a nickname that has long outlived the law itself: daylight robbery. That phrase, which we still use to describe any blatant ripoff, is a direct linguistic fossil of the window tax, a perfect encapsulation of the public feeling that something essential and God-given was being stolen from them and sold back at an exorbitant price. The story is hauntingly familiar. The logic of the tax was the same, a supposedly fair proxy for wealth. The public response was identical, a frantic, widespread bricking up of windows. The architectural consequences were the same, leading to the classic design of the British terraced house, with its long, dark floor plan and often completely blank side and rear walls. And the health consequences were just as devastating, with doctors and reformers eventually blaming the tax for the horrific death rates from cholera and tuberculosis in the dark, teeming slums of London, Manchester, and Glasgow. Because the British tax lasted for so much longer, the cat-and-mouse game between the public and the tax collectors became incredibly elaborate. The government would amend the law to close a loophole, and the public would immediately find a new one, forcing another amendment. The legal definition of a window grew into a monstrously complex document. In Scotland, the tax was especially hated. The tall, ancient tenement buildings of Edinburgh's Old Town, which could rise to 10 stories or more, were hit with colossal tax bills, and their stone facades are still peppered with the ghostly outlines of filled-in windows to this day. The British tax was finally repealed only after a long and passionate campaign by medical professionals who presented Parliament with overwhelming evidence that the tax on light was, in fact, a tax on life. Learning this doesn't lessen the misery of your own city, but it does place it in a wider, more comprehensible context. This isn't a uniquely Scandinavian madness. It is a European one. It's a story of how governments in the age of absolutism and early industrialization desperate for funds to wage their endless wars, all stumbled upon the same, fatally flawed idea. They saw a window and thought of it as a simple, taxable luxury item. They failed to see it as the vital organ of the home that it truly was: a source of light, a source of air, and a source of health. Knowing that this peculiar tax is a Europe-wide affliction makes you look at the windows of your own city in a new, more analytical light. You've seen how their absence can cause sickness and how their presence can signal status. But now you begin to appreciate the finer details. They are not just openings or tax liabilities, they are characters in a drama, speaking a subtle and complex language of their own. You've become fluent in window speak. You can now walk down any street and read the intricate stories of wealth, aspiration, and quiet desperation written in glass and wood. The most obvious part of the language is size. A large, generous window is a bold declaration of wealth, not just because it incurred a higher tax, but because the large, clear panes of glass it required were themselves a luxury good. A tiny slit of a window, conversely, speaks of poverty, a grudging concession to the need for light. Placement is just as eloquent. The dominant architectural fashion of the day, inspired by the Renaissance masters, was all about Palladian principles of symmetry and proportion. A perfectly balanced facade, with windows arranged in a harmonious mathematical order, was the ideal. This aesthetic was a sign of a rational, ordered, and above all, wealthy household. Any deviation from this symmetry, a jarring patch of brick where a window should be, was a public confession of financial compromise. But the language gets even more nuanced than that. You start paying attention to the glazing bars, the thin strips of wood or lead known as muntins, that hold the small individual panes of glass in place. Since large, single sheets of glass were still rare and expensive, almost all windows were a patchwork of smaller pieces. But among the fashionable elite, the trend was toward ever larger panes, which meant the glazing bars could become thinner, more delicate, and more elegant. The thickness of your window bars became a subtle but clear class signifier. Heavy, thick, rustic-looking bars suggested an older, more provincial home. Thin, refined bars signaled that you were up to date with the latest, most expensive fashions in glazing technology. It was a stressful time to be a carpenter, trying to meet these exacting new standards. Even the quality of the glass itself tells a story. You can now recognize the greenish, bubbly walled glass of the commoner's home from a distance. And you can appreciate the superior clarity of the expensive, imported glass used in a wealthy merchant's salon. That distorted bullseye pane, the knob-like remnant from the crown glass process, becomes a sure sign of a lower status window. Relegated to a back room or a tavern, the whole city is communicating in this strange, passive-aggressive code. Architectural semioticians, those who study signs and symbols in buildings, view the 18th century window as a key text loaded with meaning. By forcing everyone to make stark choices about their windows, the tax amplified this language, turning every home into an open book, its facade telling a detailed story of the owner's place in the world. It's like everyone is shouting about their financial situation, but they're doing it in a very quiet architectural whisper. This world of architectural signals and social anxiety, of dark rooms and creeping sickness, can begin to feel permanent, like a law of nature. It's easy to believe that this is just the way things are now. But beyond the city walls and in the brighter corners within it, in the universities, the printing houses, and the newly fashionable coffee shops, a powerful new current of thought is gathering strength. It is a movement of reason and light, and it is about to shine into the darkest recesses of the kingdom, challenging the very foundations upon which laws like the window tax were built. You start to hear its whispers. In a coffee house, for the price of a single cup, you can sit for hours listening to merchants, students, and lawyers engage in passionate debate. This is the age of enlightenment, a revolutionary intellectual movement sweeping across Europe. Philosophers and writers are proposing radical new ideas, that reason, not tradition, should be the guide for human affairs, that individuals possess natural rights that no government can take away, and that the purpose of the state is not to serve the monarch, but to promote the well-being and happiness of its citizens. These ideas, printed in pamphlets and books, are spreading like wildfire. They're incredibly dangerous to the old order. The concept that people have rights and that a government should be rational is a direct challenge to the king's unofficial policy of doing whatever I want. Slowly, you begin to see how this new thinking forms a powerful argument against the tax on light. Philosophers like John Locke had written of a natural right to life, liberty, and property. While he didn't specifically mention a right to sunlight, it's not a difficult leap to make. How can a citizen enjoy their right to life when the government imposes a tax that demonstrably makes them sick? How can they enjoy their property when they are forced to mutilate it and live in darkness just to stay solvent? The window tax, seen through this new philosophical lens, looks less like a reasonable fiscal policy and more like an act of tyranny. At the same time, a new, more scientific approach to medicine is beginning to emerge. While germ theory is still far in the future, physicians and natural philosophers are starting to reject old superstitions in favor of direct observation and data. They are the first epidemiologists, meticulously recording the conditions in hospitals, prisons, and army barracks. They prove with numbers that there is an undeniable link between fresh air, cleanliness, and survival rates. This new medical science transforms the argument against the window tax. It is no longer just a complaint from the common people about fairness. It is now a data-driven conclusion from experts. The tax is a threat to public health. The ghosts and miasmas of the past are being replaced by hard evidence. Historians debate the true reach of the Enlightenment, questioning whether its complex ideas ever filtered down to the masses. But standing in this coffee house, smelling the roasting beans, and listening to a young student read a radical pamphlet aloud to a rapt audience, you can feel it. A change is coming. The fundamental questions have been asked. What is a government for? What are a citizen's rights? And does the state have the right to tax the sun? For the first time in a long time, the answers to those questions seem to offer a glimmer of hope. The Enlightenment did not just usher in new ideas about rights and science, it also gave birth to a revolutionary new way of thinking about money, trade, and the very nature of national wealth. This emerging field of economics, born in the same coffee houses and debating societies as the new philosophies, would provide the final and perhaps most powerful set of weapons to be used against the tax on light. It was an argument that even the most pragmatic and morally flexible government minister could understand. The window tax was bad for business. The world is changing. On the outskirts of the city, a new kind of building is being constructed, a large brick edifice with a towering smokestack that paints a permanent smudge of gray against the sky. From it comes the rhythmic, thunderous sound of new machinery, powered by steam or water. This is the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, a tectonic shift that is beginning to transform the economy from one based on agriculture and small crafts to one based on mass production in factories. The true wealth of a nation, the new economists argue, is not the amount of gold piled up in the king's treasury. It is the productive capacity of its people. A Scottish philosopher named Adam Smith becomes the leading voice of this new economic thinking. His book, The Wealth of Nations, argues that productivity, fueled by the division of labor and free markets, is the engine of prosperity. For a nation to get rich, it needs its workers to be as efficient and productive as possible. And this is where the window tax reveals its ultimate absurdity. As it turns out, workers who make intricate things for a living, weavers, watchmakers, printers, and the new factory hands, do a much better job when they can actually see what they are doing. A dark workshop is an inefficient workshop. A factory floor, lit only by a few sputtering lamps, is a place where accidents happen, where materials are wasted, and where the quality of work suffers. The window tax, which had seemed so clever to the old mercantilist mind, was, in the context of this new industrial age, an act of national self-sabotage. It was a direct tax on productivity. Keeping your workforce in the dark was like trying to make your horse run faster by feeding it less hay. It was not just cruel, it was economically stupid. These new economists also argue that a good tax should be simple and efficient to collect. The window tax, which had started out simple, had become a bureaucratic nightmare of loopholes, exemptions, and legal challenges, requiring a small army of inspectors to enforce it. Furthermore, they pointed out that the tax created a huge deadweight loss, an economic term for value that is simply destroyed, benefiting no one. When a homeowner bricks up a window, he damages the value of his own property, and the state gets no revenue. Nothing is gained. Value is just lost. When a weaver works more slowly because of poor light, his potential output is lost forever. The total economic harm caused by the tax, the economists argue, is far greater than the revenue it brings in. Economic historians debate whether it was the moral arguments of the Enlightenment or the cold, hard logic of industrial capitalism that was the primary driver for reform. But in the corridors of power, the argument for profit and productivity begins to resonate more loudly than any plea for the rights of man or the health of the poor. The window tax is an old, feudal idea, and it is hopelessly out of place in this new, noisy, and dynamic world of machines and factories. The arguments are all in place. The doctors have presented their grim statistics on death and disease, the philosophers have made their case for the natural rights of man, and the new economists have laid out the cold, hard logic of productivity and profit. But ideas alone, however powerful, are rarely enough to topple a law that has been filling the state's coffers for decades. The battle must now move from the coffee house, the workshop, and the sick room into the grand wood-paneled chambers of the nation's parliament. You find a seat in the public gallery, looking down upon the assembly. It is a sea of powdered wigs and serious faces, a room that hums with the low murmur of power. Here the fate of the window tax will be decided, not by reason alone, but by politics, persuasion, and pragmatism. The debate begins. A new breed of politician, a reformer, rises to speak. He is younger than most, his voice filled with a passion fueled by the new Enlightenment ideals. He is armed not with tradition but with facts. Gentlemen, he begins, his voice ringing through the chamber. We are told this is a tax on property, a fair levy upon the wealthy. But I have walked the dark lanes of our capital. I have spoken to the physicians. I say to you, this is not a tax on property. This is a tax on health. It is a tax on the very lungs of our children. It is a tax on the productivity of our workshops. It is a tax on the light of heaven itself. He presents petitions from doctors detailing the rise of consumption and rickets. He reads letters from merchants who claim their businesses are being throttled by the choice between darkness and bankruptcy. Then, a member of the old guard rises to respond. He is a man of immense stature and traditional views, a staunch defender of the crown's prerogatives. The honorable gentleman speaks with great fire. He rumbles, his voice thick with condescension. But his passion is a luxury the state cannot afford. This tax, for all its supposed flaws, provides a steady and reliable stream of revenue. Revenue that pays for the ships that defend our coasts and the soldiers who guard our borders. I ask the gentleman, where does he propose we find this money if this tax is abolished? His idealism is admirable, but it will not launch a warship or repel an invasion. The debate rages, a clash of two different worlds. One side quotes Adam Smith and medical journals. The other side speaks of tradition and the grim necessities of state finance. You are watching the slow, grinding process of political change. For years, the arguments of the reformers have been dismissed. But now, something is different. The weight of evidence has become too heavy to ignore. The economic arguments, in particular, have begun to sway the more pragmatic members of the assembly. The world is industrializing, and the health and efficiency of the workforce are no longer fringe concerns. They are matters of national economic survival. Political historians debate the primary motivation for the eventual repeal. Was it a genuine humanitarian victory, a triumph of enlightened thinking, or was it a cold, pragmatic decision by a modernizing state that simply recognized an old tax was now an intolerable brake on the new engine of industry? Sitting in the gallery, watching the faces of the politicians, it seems to be a messy combination of both. The moral outrage of the reformers has given them the passion, but the economic data has given them the victory. The tide is turning. The old arguments in defense of the tax are beginning to sound hollow and out of touch. The light of reason, it seems, is finally beginning to dawn in the halls of power. The debates are over. The final votes have been tallied. After decades of darkness, the reformers have won. The news ripples out from the halls of Parliament, carried by fast-running messengers in the city's tireless gossip network. The window tax is to be abolished. A great collective sigh of relief seems to pass through the city, followed by a wave of jubilant celebration. Church bells, which had been silent on the matter, now ring out in triumph. People gather in the squares, not in anger, but in shared joy. The city celebrates as if it has won a great war, which, in a way, it has. A long, quiet, and poorly lit war against a profoundly bad idea. But after the initial euphoria fades, a more complex reality sets in. The law may be gone, but the scars it left on the city are etched in brick and stone. Do people immediately hire workmen to smash out the bricks and let the light come flooding back in? A few do. The very next day, you see masons at work on the grand storefront of the silversmith, the one who had defiantly paid the tax all along. Now he is proudly restoring his building to its former glory, the sharp crack of the hammer on brick a joyful sound. For the wealthy, restoring their windows becomes a new kind of status symbol, the ability to afford the instant reversal of the old law. For most people, however, the darkness remains, now a prison of poverty rather than a prison of law. Unbricking a window is an expensive undertaking. It requires a mason to knock out the infill, a carpenter to build and fit a new frame, and a glazier to source and install the costly panes of glass. First, the government made you pay to fill the hole, and now you have to pay all over again to put the hole back. It's a wonderful business model for the city's craftsmen, but for a family barely making ends meet, the cost is prohibitive. They are left in the dark, the repeal of the law a distant, abstract victory that has not changed the gloom of their own four walls. The city does not heal all at once. It heals slowly, unevenly, one window at a time. A family might save for a year to afford to reclaim a single window in their main living room, a small personal victory that makes an enormous difference to their lives. The city is slowly waking from a long, dark nap. Some have thrown open the shutters immediately. Others have hit the snooze button perhaps for years to come, and some of the changes are permanent. Those new houses, the ones that were designed from the ground up to be tax efficient, cannot be easily fixed. Their strange, deep floor plans, their windowless central rooms and long, dark corridors are a permanent legacy of the era of darkness, their very bones shaped by a repealed law. Urban historians study the resilience of cities, and the slow, patchy refenestation of your city is a perfect case study in how long the architectural and social scars of a bad policy can remain, long after the policy itself is a fading memory. The law is dead, but its ghosts are everywhere. And so our long journey through the era of the window tax is coming to a close. Decades and then centuries begin to blur and accelerate. The world of horses and candlelight gives way to one of steam, then electricity, then the quiet hum of the digital age. You find yourself standing on the very same street corner you arrived on so long ago. But it is now the 21st century. The air tastes of traffic fumes instead of coal smoke. The cobblestones have been paved over with smooth asphalt, and the night is held at bay by the warm, steady glow of electric streetlights. It is a world saturated with light, both natural and artificial. And yet, if you look closely, if you know where to search, the faint ghosts of that long, dark period are still here. You have become a historical detective. You learn to look past the modern shop signs and the bright cafe windows, focusing instead on the bones of the old buildings that have survived. You gaze up at the side of a tall 18th century townhouse, and there it is. It is the unmistakable fossil of a bricked-up window, a physical scar left behind by a law that has been dead for 200 years. Once you see one, you see them everywhere. A row of houses where one has an inexplicably asymmetrical facade, a jarring blank space where a window should be to complete the pattern. You spot a faded, peeling patch of paint on another wall and recognize the ghostly remnant of a trompe-l'oeil window, its clever illusion now a sad, flaking memory. You understand now why the older parts of the city are full of these long, thin houses with their dark central cores. You are seeing the enduring legacy of a generation of builders who were forced to design for darkness. Historic preservationists and urban planners still debate what to do with these scars. When renovating an old building, should you restore the blind window, erasing this painful part of its history, or should you preserve it as an artifact, a tangible lesson in the law of unintended consequences? For now, they remain, a quiet testament to the struggle, a reminder that the decisions made in the halls of power have real, lasting effects on the very shape of the world we inhabit. Effects that can long outlast the men who made them. The tax is gone, but the city itself has become a kind of museum, its walls still whispering the story of the time the king decided to tax the sun. Your long walk through history is ending now. The sun is setting on the modern city, and the last of the real, untaxed daylight is fading from the sky, painting the clouds in soft shades of purple and gold. The stories of the tax collectors and the anxious merchants, of the sick children in the dark tenements and the defiant nobles in their bright mansions, all begin to recede, fading back into the gentle quiet of the past. Peaceful fall of night, a soft blanket that comes to quiet the world and invite it to rest. The journey is over, the story is told, and all that is left is the gentle, steady rhythm of your own breathing, a soft and easy tide carrying you out into the calm, deep ocean of sleep.